Now, we each agreed we'd take one question, and I'll recognize someone first. Darlene Superville, Associated Press.
The question, Director Young, is does the administration believe that higher corporate income taxes will force an increase in prices in an already inflationary environment that a lot of people actually really believe now is unleashed by the American Rescue Plan from last February?
Mr. Donalds, we do not believe that is the case.
Okay, so the administration doesn't think that higher taxes are going to lead to higher prices on top of an already inflationary environment?
For corporations, are you assuming they pass on their tax rates on?
Correct, you're wrong. Corporations always pass on cost increases. They're doing it with inflationary costs, with the ability to get their products right now, the portions that they need to create their products to sell to consumers. When the cost of freight is up, the cost of wheat is up, the cost of oil is up. That's all being passed through. Yes or no?
Mr. Donalds, I don't believe, and we don't believe as administration, that asking corporations to pay 28%, they used to pay 35% before the last tax cuts, will increase inflationary pressures.
Director Young, does the administration acknowledge the fact that when the corporate tax rate was cut from 35 to 21, that the United States raised more revenue in corporate income taxes than at any other point in American history?
What we saw was a continued use of legal loopholes that prevented, I mentioned this earlier, 50 corporations, the Fortune 500, from paying any taxes.
I'm not talking about the uses of what's already in the tax code. I actually would argue that if we're going to have a fair code, we should adopt a flat tax or a fair tax. I mean, I don't think that's the administration's position. That's my position, if we're going to have a fair code. But to talk about what they use in the current legal structure of the tax code, you can't make that argument and say that, oh, well, they're using these things. I'm talking about did the government raise more revenue from corporate income taxes, yes or no?
And corporations continue to make more. That is the point.
Let's move on, because I know we're not going.
And after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis yesterday signed the state's parental rights and education legislation, Education Secretary Miguel Cardona said the administration would be monitoring its implementation to evaluate whether it violates federal civil rights law. Aside from monitoring the Florida law, is there any other actions that the White House plans to take?
Well, both the president and Secretary Cardona spoke out very forcefully against the law. The president also put out a statement yesterday about the tragic impact of this kind of law on incredibly vulnerable population. And he said that, by signing this bill, the governor has chosen to target some of Florida's most vulnerable students and families, all while under the guise of parents' rights. So the Department of Education, as you noted, will monitor this law upon implementation to evaluate whether it violates federal civil rights law. And obviously, we will come back to you as we have more information on that.
February 24.
But the
price of a barrel of oil was up significantly. The price of gas was roughly $3.65 on average in the United States. That was already significantly higher than what it's been over the last 4 years in the United States. Do you acknowledge that?
I acknowledge that there were increased energy prices that have further increased since Russian aggression.
Director Young, okay. So we understand that prices are higher now since February 24. We are going to acknowledge for the record that prices have been higher under the president's administration currently.
I'm sure you know about our executive order 13985. It requires that we incorporate equity in all we do, racial equity, rural equity, those left behind. Those are our disabled brothers and sisters. Our government should work for all people at all the time. So when we do procurement, we want to make sure that our dollars are spent with socially disadvantaged companies. So we are implementing this executive order not just in the budget, but in how we do business. But you're right, without data.
45 minutes after the president's remarks wrapped in Warsaw on Saturday, that was when a statement landed in everyone's inboxes from an unnamed White House official saying that no, the administration did not in fact change its policy with regards to Russia. I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about what happened in the interim in that 45 minutes. Did the president himself conclude that perhaps there needed to be some further clarification, or did White House advisors come to him and say, perhaps you should revisit your recent remarks? Why was that statement issued?
Well, I can tell you from working for President Biden for 7 years that only President Biden decides what President Biden is going to say. So the statement was simply a confirmation of what you then heard from the president himself yesterday, that statement did not represent a policy change, official policy change on behalf of the United States.
Compared to 2020, we're reducing the size of the deficit relative to our economy by almost 2/3, reducing inflationary pressures.
The macroeconomic overexpansion of 2021 created those problems, and then layered on was something entirely separate in terms of the further supply shocks we've seen in oil and in food. And so now I think we've got a real problem of high underlying inflation that I don't think will come down to anything like acceptable levels of its own accord. And so very difficult dilemmas as to whether to accept economic restraint or to live with high and quite possibly accelerating inflation.